Psalm 126. Short as it is, we could call a psalm in 3 movements. The psalm considers what has God done for us and with us in the past. Where are we now? And what do we hope for in the future? And I think for us, particularly, as both a congregation and as a nation, it's a psalm that gives us hope, can give us comfort, and we pray will bring us joy in this Advent season. Why do I say that? Many commentators will argue over what is the origin of Psalm 126. The Psalms of Ascent go from Psalm 120 to Psalm 132, I believe it is. Those 12 psalms were considered processional psalms. Psalms that the people sang on their way to Jerusalem to worship at the temple. And they say that these psalms were written post the exile, as people began to go back into Jerusalem and worship began again. But we always talk about coming back from the exile, coming back into Jerusalem after having been in captivity in Babylon for so long. But we forget what conditions they might have found. Because Jerusalem had been conquered, much of it had been destroyed, including the temple. So when the people came back, the elation of no longer being captive became, what are we returning to? Jerusalem is in ruins. Not unlike what many in this world experienced after World War II. The war is over. Many were released from prison camps or concentration camps, and after regaining health, what is there to return to? Homes had been confiscated or destroyed. Isn't it the same for those who maybe live in current-day Syria or the other places in this world where fighting is a way of life, not something that we in this country are familiar with? Because compared to the devastation in Syria, or the devastation across Germany and much of Europe after World War II, seeing the destruction of the World Trade Center is but a minute memory compared to those things. So what circumstances would we have to compare? Where would we, what is our point of reference? What is missing for us? The degree is not nearly the same as the devastation of war. But if I may push a little bit, when I arrived at this congregation 3 years ago, where was the hope about what could be done here? God had been good to us in the past. Everyone had stories of the wonderful days of the 1950s and 60s and early 70s when the church was packed. And this is what our parents or grandparents, or this is what the older generation had done. Here's the glory that was the Rutherford Congregational Church. And now, where were we? We were missing what had been. Some of you missing more than others. What had been. Are able to say, God has been good to us. God blessed this congregation greatly. And it was able to do good work in this community. And then it fell on hard times. And people left. And money became short. And life became more difficult because fewer people had much more work to do to carry on as in the past. So we can say we're in that same spot as Israel is in this psalm. We have wonderful memories of the past, but we can't live on that. Israel could not live on what God had done in the past with the temple, because the temple was in ruins. I am grateful our sanctuary is not in ruins. And we are not looking at what some congregations sometimes have to deal with, the loss of a sanctuary due to a tragedy. God willing, we won't ever face that. I hope we don't ever face that. But what we want, what we need, is God's presence. We need to find God among us again. Restore our fortunes, O God. Remember us. Remember your people. God made covenants with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob, with Moses, with David. And then again, when they reached the land of Canaan, with Joshua and with all Israel. God also remembers us today. Because God has remembered us in bringing us Jesus to restore us again to favor with God. In the candle lighting ceremony, the words were there from the prophet Isaiah, where the prophet, after having had to tell the people all of the difficult things that were going to happen to them, then is given a message to say, comfort my people. I will return. I will again be their people. I will renew my covenant with them. For us, the renewal of that covenant is celebrated each year when we gather on Christmas Eve to remember that God gave us an amazing gift in the birth of Jesus. We can say, restore our fortunes, O God. We can claim this psalm as our own in 2017 and 2018 also, God willing, as this is the voice that we have. You were with us in the past. We feel like you're not here. 2 weeks ago, Psalm 80, where are you, God? Last week, in Psalm 85, restore us. That cry is throughout Advent. And the expectation we have is that God might come back to us. To ask that God not just might, you are our God. As the psalmist gave them language to say, we are your people. Remember us. Stand with us. And as we had several weeks ago, when we looked at the book of Deuteronomy, when Moses said, without your presence, if you don't go with us, we don't want to go into the future. We don't want to be part of the land of Canaan. We don't want a promised land without our God with us. And I hope that our prayer may be the same. We want to all live into and through 2018. We want to be something better than we are today. But our prayer needs to also be, restore our fortunes, O God. There has been weeping, maybe not literal, physical weeping, in this congregation over the loss of what was. But there's certainly what has been a sadness, a mourning. And the psalm tells us that when what we do, when we sow our seed, because these psalms were written to an agricultural society, the people knew about planting and harvest. Farmers would sow not knowing that the spring rains would come. They did not know for sure if what seed they put into the ground would be a full harvest or would there be drought and they would only get a small crop. But when we water the plants, when we water the seed that we put down, then God says, I will allow you to reap with joy. God asks us to come to God with our concerns, with our fears, with our anxieties, no matter what they are, and to put them at God's feet and to say, help us, restore us. To give us the chance to be here another day, so to speak. To be able to live well again in your presence, God. And help us to remember that it is through the birth of your Son, Jesus, the Christ, that we are able to again be in your presence, to be reconciled to you, O God, to become who we need to be. God calls us. In spite of all the garbage that goes around us, and boy, I'm tempted to use another word, to be real. In spite of everything, God is with us. We lose sight of that sometimes. We think we have to do everything on our own. It's up to us. And God says, no. Call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will answer you. When we forget to call on God, when we forget to ask God to restore us, God has no prayer to answer. How will we have God's presence? But if we together, and that's another thing about this psalm, it is the prayer of the community. It's not an individual. It's not just me. It's all of us together. The community needs God's help. The community wants God's blessing. Restore our fortunes, O God. Bring us back into your favor. Help us to walk before you as you want us to love each other. Remember last week, Psalm 85, what was salvation? Steadfast love, righteousness, peace, justice. Restore us. Bring that back to us. Bring that back to our nation. Bring that back to us in faithful leadership. wise leadership, courageous leadership. Restore our fortunes, O God. Not just me, not just this church, but all God's people. And therein is the promise that we find when we celebrate the birth of Jesus, that God will be with us again.